The Dave Canales intro press conference for the Carolina Panthers took place yesterday. He killed it. He crushed it, knocked it out of the park. He's a very good public speaker, and you know, you just hope that somehow that translates to very good offensive play caller. Did very well. But after the press conference, different television outlets were granted by the media people over there with the Carolina Panthers the ability to have quick one-on-one. Sit down, get a one-on-one. Our very good friend of the show, Chris Lee, WRAL Sports, was one of those granted the opportunity. And by the way, you can catch most of those comments on the Panthers Playbook podcast.
All of them.
All of those comments on the Panthers Playbook podcast. He's put together some packages for WRAL News. I'm sure you can find those online. So go ahead and enjoy it all. But there's one thing that stuck out to me, and it's because of pure repetition. There's a rule in radio, and I don't even know if this still applies. But when I first got into radio, I was also selling like advertisements. I was a salesperson also, and before they let you go out on the streets and start making pitches to business owners, they train you. And I went to a training, and they hammered us in the face with the rule of three. You got to hear something 3 times to remember it. You got to hear something 3 times to remember it. So when you're putting together the advertising packages, it's all about making sure the listeners hear it 3 times. You could put it at the same time every day. So if someone's in the car 3 times, that same time, they're driving home or whatever it is, boom, they hear it 3 consecutive days, rule of 3 accomplished. You could put it on 3 times within 15 minutes. If you're in the car all 15 minutes, boom, you heard it 3 times. The rule of 3. Well, I can tell you right now, I've heard this about 300 times since Dave Canales was hired to be the Carolina Panthers. He's Pete Carroll Jr. And the first time I heard it was right here on this program. I was interviewing Scott Reynolds from the Pewter Report, and he said Pete Carroll Jr., and I went, ooh. You can go back. The interview is on our YouTube page, and when it's a phone interview, sometimes I'm a little awkward because it's just the camera is just on me as I listen. But you can see it when he says Pete Carroll Jr., my eyes light up. You can actually probably hear it. I click my pen, and I write down on my notepad, Pete Carroll Jr., because I was like, that's awesome. That's a good thing. Pete Carroll is a Hall of Fame coach, right? Pete Carroll won a Super Bowl. Pete Carroll won a national championship. Pete Carroll did a lot of good. Pete Carroll turned Russell Wilson into Russell Wilson. Pete Carroll had the Legion of Boom. And then like a day later, Pete Carroll Jr. came up again. And then in another conversation later that day, he's like Pete Carroll. Then in another conversation later that day, did you know he worked under Pete Carroll? Pete Carroll, Pete Carroll, Pete Carroll. Then he got to his opening press conference, and he gave a long thank you to
Pete Carroll.
Bill Belichick. No, Yes, Pete Carroll. It was Pete Carroll. Gotcha. Little Friday joke there. Pete Carroll, Pete Carroll, Pete Carroll. Then he goes into his one-on-ones with Chris Lee, and Chris Lee asks him about Pete Carroll, and here's Dave Canales.
So I was part of his high school camps when I was a junior college coach, and these camps are so much fun. He wanted it to be high energy. He wanted it to be a lot of teaching, everybody working, not staring down at your scripts, but we're running all around, and I think he could sense that that was just me, and when he had an opportunity to hire me in 2009, I was able to join his staff at USC, and then just followed him to Seattle, 6 or 7 different job titles, and just a whole lot of mentoring, a lot of encouragement, a lot of challenging conversations along the way, and I can't say what a great resource he's been and will continue to be for my first chance to be a head coach.
Pete Carroll. I remember it. He says it a lot. I'm a little worried, or I'm asking maybe should we be worried? Is he doing a Pete Carroll impression? Because he comes across very, very Pete Carroll-ish. Mm-hmm. Very like exact same energy, exact same optimism, exact same.
A lot of positivity.
Pete Carroll Jr. I want to see him on game day and know how many packs of gum he goes through. Like, is he going to go gray early and just hit that silver fox early on in his, like, where does the comparison stop? Keeping himself in very good shape. Wouldn't be surprised if in his 70s he could still run around and throw the football like we were all impressed with Pete Carroll doing a couple months ago.
Running scout team.
And then I got to thinking about Bill Belichick disciples, right? The coaching tree, the assistants that have left Bill Belichick. And we could run down Charlie Weiss, Romeo Crennel, Eric Mangini, Josh McDaniels, on and on, Joe Judge, on and on and on, and how they have not been great head coaches. They've been good coordinators, have not been great head coaches. And my instinct is that it's because they're doing a Belichick impression, right? They're trying to do the Patriot way. They're trying to be the grumbly guy. They're trying to be football, do your job. And instead of letting their own personality shine through. Ryan Russillo used to work for ESPN, now works for The Ringer, tells a story of Eric Mangini, who he eventually worked with Eric Mangini when Eric Mangini joined the media. And he remembered him as the coach of the Jets, who was this ornery football guy, curmudgeon, very Belichickian. And so when he had to work with them, he was prepared for like, gosh, this is going to be a thing. And then Mangini ended up being really personable and ended up being really kind of magnetic and ended up being fun-loving. And Russillo was like, so he was doing like a performance thing when he was the head coach of the Jets. He was doing like a performance thing. He wasn't being himself. And I think that matters. If you're doing a Belichick impression, it's not going to work because authenticity is the number one thing you need in a locker room of any kind. A locker room is the best radar for inauthentic anything of the entire world. You walk in there and you're not yourself, they're going to pick up on it and they're going to make fun of you. Is Dave Canales naturally that Pete Carroll-like guy, or does he think that the role of the head coach is supposed to do that because that's what Pete Carroll did, and he was out there for 13, 14 years, and as you just heard him say, Pete Carroll plucked him out of the junior college ranks and brought him on up, and he owes so much to Pete Carroll. Right? Are you influenced by or are you doing an impression of? Think of it like a musician. If you are influenced by Prince or James Brown or Elvis, if you're influenced by them, you're inspired by them, you like their music, and there's hints of what they do in your music. If you're doing an impression of them, then you should go on Saturday Night Live.
That's different. Yeah.
Then you have a side stage show in Vegas somewhere, and you're playing their hits and trying to be them. Which is more impressive? Which is more fun to watch? Which are you buying more tickets for? Right, like Bruno Mars, who was influenced by Elvis and Prince and James Brown, or the people that dress up like him and do the cover shows. Right? Now, here's the big question that I have. First of all, is he being authentic? That's number one. Mm-hmm. Second is, what did a year away do? Because he was not with Pete Carroll last year. He was with Todd Bowles in Tampa.
Much different personality.
Did he look around and go, okay, here's the parts of Pete Carroll that are most important. Here's the influences that are actions, things that he does that helps him run a football team, and then I can do them as me. Did he look around and go, all right, here's some things Todd Bowles did. That's actually not bad. Pete doesn't do that, but I like that. That's the question. And here's the thing. A bunch of assistants from Tampa, some that were only with him for a year in Tampa, are coming with him to Carolina. So he's magnetic either way. He's magnetic in his impersonation, or he's magnetic in his authenticity, but people believe it. He just needs to stick to it if it's him.